Welcome back to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I am David Carr, your host of Steward Your Business, where we bring teams together to accomplish great things. And we also bring amazing guests here on the podcast. This week, I've got Melissa Gray of the Law Spot, and I'm so grateful to have Melissa on here. We actually haven't had legal counsel on very often, and so I'm actually very excited to get Melissa in here and start sharing some nuggets, some wisdom with y'all on the podcast today. So, Melissa, on behalf of the Business Roundtable Podcast, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Melissa and I had connected last year, and I said, well, we got to have you on the podcast, Melissa, because the work that you're doing in helping businesses get started, scaling, dealing with intellectual property or rights, I should say, and dealing with contracts. There's a whole host of things that as a business owner I face, I realize there's a lot I don't know, and I can get myself into trouble real quick if I'm not, taking the right steps. And so, Melissa, I want to just thank you for coming on here, and you're going to hopefully walk us today. We talked a little bit before we start recording, kind of, how you can walk yourself through, audit yourself, see where you're at in your business, and see where you might be missing the mark, where you might need some help in the legal space. And, all things good, all things are great until it's not great, right? And then you're totally unaware, kind of. And so what I find legal help, something like you, Melissa, coming in, is they're looking at the gaps. They're looking where there's some things where you have risk and helping you avoid those pitfalls. And so, Melissa, I just want to say thank you for coming on here and walking us through, because it's so important as a business owner, especially when we're just starting and scaling out. I was telling you earlier, some people say, well, I got my LLC or my S Corp and I'm ready to go. I'm like, are you really? Have you thought through all this stuff?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, everything, but tell us a little bit about your background, Melissa,
Sure.
as a lawyer, where you're at, and just a little bit about the Law Spot.
Yeah. So I have started my career in private practice. And so I worked at a law firm serving individual clients. I had managed large intellectual property portfolios. So people's businesses that have trademarks, copyrights, that manage those marks both in the United States and worldwide. When I had my first child, I went in-house at a company thinking that was going to be a little more predictable pace. But it ended up being an enormous opportunity to learn the intricacies of a business from the ground up, and really gave me an education that I don't think many lawyers appreciate, that you got to roll up your sleeves and you got to work with the business units, and every single department, from the warehouse employees to the C-suite, has their own initiatives, getting them all aligned for a single vision and goal, and then trying not to be the department of no, but really supporting the business in their long-term objectives while safeguarding it from the risk and compliance, pitfalls that might come. So that was a very formative part of my career. And then post-COVID did go back to private practice and started my firm about 2 years ago now. So I am the founder of the Law Spot. And my vision was to, bring this level of accessibility to legal for these business owners that might find this area just super overwhelming.
Yes.
Just like people look at finance, as this box of things that they don't want to look at or dig into. I feel like legal can have that reputation as well. And really, legal simplified is my tagline, because I want entrepreneurs to feel empowered to understand at a baseline, not necessarily do it themselves, right? But take ownership of what those buckets are, understand that they need at least an annual check-in, and then really empower them to say, okay, how am I going to make a plan to mitigate this risk? How am I going to make sure that I don't, put my business in jeopardy long term? And all of this goes back to just being proactive about this component, just like looking at your numbers is how every, business needs to be on it. You got to look at the legal. You have to just make sure that you're aware, and then you're taking action that you need to safeguard yourself. So that's the law spot in general. I've had a really fun time sort of building and growing the last 2 years, and yeah, happy to
Yeah. Well, I
part
think
wisdom today.
what I love about what you're messaging here is simplified and accessible, Melissa, because I think what you mentioned, the financial side of that area and legal, I've heard business owners or individuals, they feel intimidated talking with somebody in this space. Sometimes they even feel they're even almost I don't say feel stupid. They feel like I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Or when they do finally reach somebody, they don't have a positive experience. It's very negative or it's very overwhelming. And I feel the warmth, I feel the care that come across from you, Melissa. Like, look, I'm not this gigantic firm. You're not just a number to me. You're meaningful. You have a direct connection with me,
yeah,
Melissa, which a lot of people don't have. They don't know who I'm going to get. I'm just going to call some kind of phone. Who's going to be at the other end of the line, kind of a thing, you know?
right, right. And I think that initial, um, you know, it's a strategic partnership. Your
Hmm.
relationship with your attorney should not be transactional, or
Hmm.
you're you're being reactive, not proactive. If you
Yes.
call somebody that you have a relationship with, it should theoretically save you time, energy, and money, because you've already laid the foundation
Yes.
for educating your partner, your lawyer, on the objectives of your firm, your 3, 5, 10-year goals for the firm, where you
Hmm.
are. And
Hmm.
and when you pick up the phone for that triage or whatever issue that might come up, they're already integrated, and they know, nope, this is our plan. This is how we've already mitigated the risk. And
Yes.
here's what our strategy should be because of XYZ. So it's not often, it's not always done that way, but
Hmm.
if you can navigate that, it sounds a lot less stressful, and it is, because
Yeah.
you've already put in that work to establish the relationship with somebody that understands your long-term objectives and the operational components of your business from a risk standpoint.
Oh yeah. That's absolutely. And this is part of the reason, why we do the Business Roundtable podcast, because we want to hear people like yourself, Melissa, that share this philosophy of, how we come alongside business owners. And it's different, like you said, than a lot of other ways. And I think this is so important. The
Yeah,
relationship, the understanding that you're building and you're collaborating together, so that you can really be there. Because we don't want the opposite of like, well, I don't want to call. It's going to cost me. It's like that's totally counterintuitive. It's not the way that you work, the way I work. But it's like, no, no, we're here to help you along the journey. And so again, so important, Melissa, why you're here today. One of the things we're gonna walk through today, which I really appreciate, is how, as a business owner, can I look and start like kind of the self audit process to look at saying, you know what, I might need some help here. Here's some
yeah,
things I should be considering, so that you can get somebody on early on, like you're saying, Melissa, instead of waiting till, oh man, somebody is infringing on my intellectual property. How am I going to deal with this? And it's
right,
already late, and now you're trying to do catch up. So being preventative and working with somebody
yeah.
like you, so that you can actually scale up safely and build a strong business. So if you would, Melissa, I would just love you to have
Yeah.
share us, because I think it's gonna be so informational to our audience here on the Business Roundtable podcast.
Sure, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
if I'm meeting a new client, we have what we call the Spot On Legal Audit. So, when I meet you, I want to understand sort of the snapshot of your business today,
Mhm.
and then understand where you want to go in the future. Whether that's a really rapid scale up, whether that you're just sustaining, like it varies for everyone. So the
Mhm.
plan will change for everyone. But the main components of that are understanding the structure of your business from an
Mhm.
entity standpoint, right? Are you an LLC? Are you a corporation? Was that set up properly? Do we have partnership agreements in place for all of those individuals? Do you have, are you in compliance with the local and state regulations? Is all of that foundational, preliminary work done correctly? Hopefully it is. you'd be surprised how often it's not. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many people that skip the partnership agreement and then they only get to that point where they have a dispute with their
Mm-hmm.
partner. And if you don't have a agreement in place with your partners, Texas has one for you. And it's not always what you guys would have agreed on if you had just taken the time to document your understanding. Maybe you have a money partner, maybe you have an equity part, or a money partner or sweat equity partner. And knowing what you intended, hindsight's 2020. So
Yep.
making sure those things are there so that as you're growing and scaling, those are not going to come back to bite you as you go. And that
Wait,
goes in.
I want to just reiterate,
Yeah.
Melissa, because I think that's so important. I don't know if the audience is listening, but if you are getting into any kind of partnership, please listen to what Melissa's saying, because I've heard too many business owners say, "I'm screwed by my partner. I don't know how to get out of this. This is not fair and equitable." There's a whole host of things in there, like you're saying, Melissa, and
Yeah.
so they just, I I'm a very optimistic person too, and I want to like, oh, it's gonna work out great.
Of
But
course,
right?
especially, and I will just add one more, especially in the family context,
Oh,
people. If you're
mhm.
going into business with your members of your family, it's even more important to put it in place, because those are the most wild
I believe you.
of stories. So just
I
do it while
believe you.
everyone's getting along, and not after Thanksgiving dinner blows up, from a political conversation or
Yes.
whatever the case might be.
Right, right. No, so I just
So
wanted to reiterate that if you're listening, if you're
yes.
considering, even if you're currently in a partnership, get it checked out, make sure everything is looking good. But anyways, Melissa, go ahead. I just had to
Absolutely. So, and
emphasize
along
that.
that line, right, that's a contract. So,
Yeah.
pulling out not just the foundational contracts, but all of the contracts that you have with your vendors, depending on,
Mm,
what your product or service
yes.
is. Where are the levers of, where are the risk exposures within those documents, and how can you mitigate them, either, through insurance or some other deferred, liability? There
Mhm,
are opportunities to sort of just tighten that up, have a really clear picture. We source from X country. They, if it gets lost in transit, who's responsible? Like
mhm.
understanding where the dollars could get lost and
Yep.
where your vulnerabilities could be. So just
Mhm.
making sure that, one, you have an agreement.
Yes.
Again, you would be shocked how much that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then that it's, up to date. And
Mm,
if the terms have changed, getting a new amended agreement. It is not a set in stone document, right? If you had an
mhm.
agreement 5 years ago and you've now doubled the amount of orders, like, your relationship has changed, and that should be documented, and those updates should be put in writing. So
It's so important.
statements of work getting actually revised and signed so that everyone is aware. And if you are adjusting the terms in real time because of some market condition, that you're just making sure that you have all of those things clear from, uh, a contract standpoint
Yeah.
is key. The third bucket is your intellectual property. What have you developed in your business?
Mhm.
And that's not just your name, a logo, a design mark for your business. That is,
Mhm.
what do customers identify as you, as
Mm,
source of goods or services for you? Do you use a new tagline that's been very successful? Do
mm,
you have this particular type of packaging that is really unique? And I had one example. There was this cosmetic brand that used a burlap sack for their makeup product. I forget exactly what it is, but that was a trade dress for them, so that everyone who saw that burlap sack for that product knew that it came from them. So
mm.
think about the brand equity that you've created in a way that's holistic and not just an afterthought. Like, what is really driving customers to you, and what do
Mhm.
you want them to remember? And then take steps to protect that, whether it's
Mhm.
copyrights, patents, or trademarks, and invest where your dollars are going from a product and service standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the IP, and I could talk about IP all day. So if we want to
Yes.
dig into that, we can.
Yes.
But on the growth side, you also
Mm-hmm.
want to audit how your employee stack looks, right? So if we're moving to the people part of the
Yep.
equation, are
Mm-hmm.
you using independent contractors? Are
Yeah.
you classifying them correctly? Are they actually W-2s? Do you control where they work, when they work, how they work? Are you providing tools to them? Making sure that you're complying with those rules, and
Mm-hmm.
those can get a
Oh,
little
yes.
wonky in
Yes.
terms of what you're doing. I know a lot of people in the trade businesses that sort of skirt that line of
Mm-hmm.
what constitutes an independent contractor versus an employee. So,
Yes.
and there's movement there. So you want to pay attention to what that looks like. Are you providing, benefits? Do you have an employee handbook that you need to update? Because, like, for example, everyone updated their handbooks during COVID because
Yep.
we had never had COVID before and we
Right.
didn't know what the work from home policy was or
Mm-hmm.
all those
Mm-hmm.
things. So, what's your AI policy? What's your social media policy? All these things that are coming down to you as a business owner. You need to think about how you want your employees to act with respect to that thing. And if there's something new, then updating those understandings with them so that you're in alignment on what your vision for your company is and making sure that they're aware of it.
Yeah, Melissa, you mentioned a couple important things that I've seen over the years. As you know, I'm here in California. We have some really stringent laws and focus on whether you're an employee or independent contractor.
Yes.
And I've seen some businesses get into some serious hot water because they were treating people as an independent contractor when they really should be treated, like you said, an employee. And so at least evaluating, having somebody like you, Melissa, like evaluating what's the risk, what's the exposure here, are and some there is sometimes there is an interpretation of the law, and you were
Sure.
saying, are we what's the precedent here, right? What are the things that have been trending or not, and so having somebody like you, Melissa, to advise you and say, look, here's where your exposure is, setting these things up. I often see a lot of smaller companies, Melissa, set up master services agreement, like you said, these scope of works or these task orders, but they might have set these up years ago and they have not looked at them. And so, how often would you say you need to be looking at some of these kind of documents or agreements, Melissa, once you
I,
set
I
them up?
I mean, at least annually, right? Like
Mhm.
every January, I'm like, okay, or maybe you do it in the spring. This is like spring cleaning, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What are you doing now that you weren't doing a year from now?
Uh-huh.
And really, um, ideally, it's if you run your business by quarter,
Yep.
like, and you have like a quarterly review.
Mhm.
Did we like just check the boxes? Did anything
Mhm.
change on these core issues during the
Right.
quarter? And you don't want to have to be updating your MSA every quarter. That would be
Yep.
ridiculous. But at least
Mhm.
make sure that you are setting the roadmap for, okay, this is going to need to be addressed, and
Uh-huh.
that you know where it is in terms of your priority schedule, and that
Yeah.
it doesn't just get forgotten, right?
I
Put it on a list. If you follow traction or the EOS method,
Yeah,
put it on the action item list. Just
yeah.
don't let it fall to the ether and never address it again, because it's it's inevitably the one that will come up.
Right? It's
Like,
you're so true. That's what I've seen. So where are you putting it on there? Because what happens is I've seen,
yeah,
Melissa, as a business owner, they get started, they get these things great, and then they put it on the shelf and they're going, and there's nobody else looking at this. They're like,
yeah,
I didn't know I was supposed to look at this. And the business owner hasn't anybody prompting them like you, Melissa, saying, have you reviewed X, Y, and Z? Have you looked at
yeah.
these things? Oh, no, I haven't. Well, we probably should dust that off. I definitely know employee handbooks for sure, always are getting, it's almost like a living document, but yeah, trying to like
It
stay on
should
top of that.
be, yeah,
Yeah.
a living document. And
Mhm.
and some of these come up already, but so, and moving to the next bucket, it's
Yeah.
tax compliance,
Mhm.
right? Tax compliance. But did you, or were you traditionally in a certain subset of products that didn't charge sales tax, and now this particular product does. And like making sure that you are just making sure that you check the boxes on your federal, state, and local taxes, that you have your relationship with your advisor. I'm so, apparently there are like purple unicorns in terms of finding somebody that you really resonate with on this, on like a CPA or tax advisor side. But that is much like an attorney relationship. They should also be on your list of, okay, this is our new initiative. What is on the tax implications for if we start this new line of services or goods? Do we need to do anything internally to change that? And the challenge for small business owners, you're in this like, a lot of my clients are not necessarily to the level where they have a on staff controller or CFO. So it's like this just void of help when you're in this, under 10 million or under 5 million mark, and even under 1 million, you're doing your best, and you don't know what you don't know, but asking the question, just asking the question to the professional is where you start. And same on the insurance front. If you've doing something that you never have done before, like if I were to add securities work to my firm, that is a different component, and it would require me to disclose that to my insurance carrier because it's a different risk profile of the business than what I originally got, malpractice coverage for. So all of those conversations they might come up in your renewals, but just checking the boxes, where are we? And then digital compliance, this is one that people forget about, but there's regulations on your website for complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's, are your terms and conditions up to date on the privacy policies and cybersecurity measures that you're taking for your business? I know you're going to have someone on here to talk about that. So, but like just making sure that it aligns with what you're actually doing with the information that you're collecting. Are you GDPR compliant? Are you required to, comply with the California Consumer Protection Act? Do all of those things are not necessarily difficult, but you need to make sure that you're there. Do you have a provision for the DMCA? If someone uploads a picture, can someone complain about it? And then you have a procedure for how to take it down. Those things enable you to mitigate your risk of intellectual property infringement and other just easy procedural things that could result in a judgment for you, but can just be mitigated. And then you've got your industry, specific stuff. If you do real estate, you probably should be up to date on, the environmental regulations for certain pieces of property. If you're in the AI space, you want to pay attention to what the Supreme Court is going to decide about, whether something is copyright infringement, like those. Just knowing what's specific for your industry too should be added to the audit, right? Like if there should just be a little miscellaneous one at the bottom. So that's my standard sort of checks for a business. And we kind of just give them this list for them to do a self-evaluation and say, okay, I think I'm doing okay here. I think I really need some help here. And then when we take that back, we say, okay, here's where we could use some tightening up. And then we prioritize it in terms of length of time, budget, and risk. And that way you're strategically addressing things, because to do everything all at once can be super overwhelming, and it's not, no one wants to, you can't necessarily sacrifice the trajectory of the entire business just to address one thing, but you can chip away at it over time and really integrate it into your processes so it's not so burdensome. Because if you understand where those levers are from an operational standpoint, this can actually be integrated very easily into a process. but you
Totally
got
see
to
that.
know what they are to know where to fit them into your process.
Yeah. Oh man, Melissa, you've hit a lot of good points here. I mean, what I hope business owners are hearing is that you said, like, number one, I'm gonna make sure everybody has all your contact information, how to get a hold of you, in our show notes here. So definitely you're gonna be able to find Law Spot, and Melissa and I are also connected on LinkedIn and things as well. But I liked how you broke it down. You said, you're looking at, you know, how much, what's the risk that once we finish this audit, what's the risk, how much time is it going to take, what's the budget here, you're helping evaluate triage, because sometimes I find business owners, we might choose something that is, maybe that's not as risky, and we're focusing on something that, and more like we're ignoring something that's what much more risky. You're like, oh, I didn't
Right.
even realize that because I just went with what I kind of knew or knew more about. And so having something like you, Melissa, that's coming through and getting this audit and saying, "Oh, okay, I didn't even know what I didn't know."
Right.
Right?
And it has to, that's why it's just so imperative that that be a two-way conversation, because unless your lawyer knows what your objectives are, then that, what I think is the priority, isn't necessarily what's best for the business in that moment,
Mhm.
or where those risks are going to come to head, more immediately than something else. So
Mhm.
it's a really good process, and internally, I think it's a great exercise just to go through, um, on at least an annual basis.
At least I would 100% agree with you on at least an annual basis. Because looking at that, and depending on, again, what industry you're in, I've done a lot of work in the environmental consulting, professional services space, Melissa, and like looking at, you know, you mentioned MSAs, but sometimes, or not necessarily partnership, but just pure teaming agreements going after a
Mhm.
particular work. What does that look like? Um, and again, having worked with somebody you like, Melissa, and say, let's look at what this opportunity is and how you guys are going to work together. It's a worthwhile investment. If, obviously you have to look at the, does it, if you're putting all this effort together and you really want this to work out, I've seen businesses that haven't done that well, and then they're really frustrated with, they've won work, and then like, well, that, similarly to a partnership, the teaming agreement wasn't clear, and
Yeah.
so it didn't end up the way they really wanted it to be. And it keeps everybody just, very intentional about how are we going to do this, so nobody has, misunderstandings, right, Melissa, coming in there,
Yeah.
and you're like, here, you're an advocate for your client of like, let me help you get the best for you guys, and I'm looking after you.
And really, once you go through the motions, unless you've got just so many segments of your business, right? You sell widgets. We know where we get our widgets from. We know
Mhm,
where we're selling them to. We
mhm,
know what states we're in. Like, if you can get your team aligned on what your playbook is with your lawyer, like, nope,
mhm,
everyone agrees this is the minimum threshold of risk, and then you
mhm,
guys can play within these bounds, it actually makes your sales teams so much more empowered to
mhm,
get those initial term sheets set, because everybody knows, nope, we're, this is our minimum threshold, and then
mhm,
if it requires going up the chain,
mhm,
it's a really easy, okay, we got everything we wanted, but they want to increase this provision. Are we
mhm.
comfortable with that?
Right.
And it just can create a lot of efficiency on the on speed, if you uh, align with your legal team up front. But that's a perfect world, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, again, as we're getting close to the end of the episode here, I think it's so important to be able to come to somebody like you, Melissa, and like say, like, I'm not sure. I've got some new contract from a new client that I'm going to be a part of, and it's not my contract, it's theirs. What am I
Right.
agreeing to, right? um and there's some other terms in there, and I've seen some pretty kind of, they just sometimes, especially larger firms, they just this big boilerplate one, and it's like, I
Yeah.
don't, you're asking me to carry XY insurance or this other thing, and I'm like, I don't even do that stuff, and so it doesn't make sense. So like, how I don't know how to respond. I don't know legally, right, how to
Yeah.
respond. So somebody talking, somebody like you, Melissa, somebody say, let me help you, let me look at this, and be an advocate for you, right?
Yes. And I think this is one of the pain points that I've seen, and I'm trying to address with my clients. So I've built a tool to empower internal teams to, so sorry.
You're getting that. It's either like
Exit. No, I've built a tool to empower internal teams to do that first pass themselves with AI using a tool called Spot Check, which is it's trained to you can upload the document and it will pull out the key provisions for you, identify loopholes, it'll simplify definitions, it will give you a score of risk so you can see, okay, in the grand scheme, what are the problematic provisions? It's going to call out things like insurance, indemnification, attorney's fees, key dates, depending on the contract type, it's going to analyze what the most common industry terms are and where this might differ from that. So you can decide as a business, right? Nope, this is risky. We need to get this reviewed and changed. Or, you know what? We're going to let it fly this time. And understanding, AI is not perfect, but it is a great first tool for a business owner that doesn't necessarily have, the firms in Dallas, I'm sure in California and New York as well. They're charging, $1,000 an hour or whatever it is. And you don't necessarily need that level of lawyering on a document that's like that when all you need is information. You're not necessarily at a leverage position where you can change the terms, but you need to understand what they are so that you can either shift the risk or you can say, this could actually crush us. We're not going to do this. So, and that it's just information. And so I want to empower my business owners to look at the agreements, have that level of ownership over them. And it just makes my ability to help so much better and enjoyable to be like, nope, everyone is aligned on what this says. We all know this is a percentage of risk that we're okay with, and we're going to push forward in spite of it, or we're going to push back on that term because we're not okay with it.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, so as we're wrapping up here, what's the best ways for folks to get a hold of you, Melissa? Because I think there's going to have a lot of questions. You're going to have a lot of people following up like, okay, give me the audit. Help me figure out where I have this risk or exposure.
So my website is thelawspot.com. There's lots of resources on there. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, social media. I give a lot of helpful tips and resources there. So follow along. You can schedule a consultation with either me or one of my attorneys directly on the website. And, I'm happy to be a resource for the small business community and look forward to doing that. So thank you so much for having me.
No, Melissa, it's really great having you here. I think you gave so many great nuggets, definitely ones that I work with business owners that I feel really need to hear. Would be so valuable. I'm super excited about what you're bringing on with your new service with Spot Check, as well as part of the Law Spot and all of that you're doing. Thank you for being here on the Business Roundtable Podcast. I'm sure we'll have you back because, hey, like you said, there's annual reviews. We got to stay up on top of all these legal issues, right?
Thank you, David.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks, everybody, for listening in on the Business Roundtable Podcast. Of course, we love having your comments, your feedback, your reviews online, and joining us. And if you'd like to be a guest, reach out to me. We always love having new guests like Melissa here from the Law Spot. Thanks, everybody, for being a part of the podcast today. And until next time, take good care. Thanks, everybody.